Please, close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember the exact smell of your grandmother's kitchen on a late Tuesday afternoon. Can you smell the rich, peppery aroma of green olive oil warming in a battered iron pan? Can you hear the rhythmic, comforting ticking of the old wall clock mingling with the faint, crackling sounds of a folk song playing on a dusty transistor radio? Welcome, my dear friends, to a very special journey back in time. Today, we are traveling back to Greece in the 1960s, the 1970s, and the 1980s. We are going to look back at 20 incredibly cheap, simple foods we ate when money was scarce, but our hearts and homes were completely full. These are the humble dishes that raised us, the snacks that comforted us, and the flavors that define our childhoods. And please, stay with me until the very end, because the final memory we will share is perhaps the most touching of all, a pure taste of sunshine that cost absolutely nothing, but meant absolutely everything. Before we walk into that nostalgic kitchen, let us remember how time itself felt completely different back then. In those days, time flowed much slower, like a quiet river without the rushing rapids of our modern, frantic world. We did not have instant gratification, and we certainly did not have much money in our pockets. But there is a modern myth that because we lacked advanced technology and wealth, we were somehow poorer in spirit. That could not be further from the truth. Our wealth was not kept in a bank account. It was found in the deep, unbreakable connections we had with our neighbors, our families, and our daily rituals. Waiting was not an inconvenience. It was a beautiful part of life. We waited for the dough to rise. We waited for the milkman to arrive. And we waited for Sunday to enjoy a tiny piece of meat. This waiting gave immense value to every single bite we took. When a mother managed to stretch a few simple ingredients to feed a large, hungry family, it was nothing short of a daily miracle. We ate slowly, sitting close together at cramped wooden tables, sharing stories, sharing laughter, and sharing our lives. Our plates may have been modest, but the emotional nourishment we received was richer than any modern luxury. Let us begin with something so simple, yet so profoundly ingrained in our collective memory. Think of the late afternoons when the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the dusty neighborhood streets. You had been playing outside for hours, chasing a worn-out ball, and your stomach would begin to rumble. You did not ask for elaborate sweets. Instead, you would run into the cool, dark kitchen where your grandmother was waiting. She would take a thick slice of rustic, crusty bread, baked in the neighborhood oven just a day before. With a steady, weathered hand, she would drizzle a generous amount of rich, green olive oil over the porous surface, watching it soak into the crumb. Then came the magic touch, a heavy sprinkle of crystalline white sugar that would stick to the oil, glistening like tiny diamonds. You would take that slice and run back out to the street, eating it greedily. The crunch of the sugar, the peppery warmth of the olive oil, and the earthy tang of the sourdough bread created a symphony of flavors that no expensive modern dessert could replicate. It was a sweet treat born out of necessity, a testament to the ingenuity of mothers who knew how to turn basic pantry staples into a feast. This humble snack was not just food, it was a tangible expression of love, binding us together in the simple joy of shared afternoons. Now, let us turn our memories to the cold winter evenings, when the chill would seep through the thin window panes and the wind howled around the stone corners of the house. In those days, heating was a great luxury, and warmth truly had to come from within. The unmistakable, slightly sour aroma of trahanas boiling on the small stovetop was the ultimate promise of comfort. This ancient, humble pasta, made during the long, hot days of summer from cracked wheat and soured milk, was dried in the sun and carefully stored in cloth bags for the winter months. Preparing it was a ritual of patience. The dry, pebble-like grains would be stirred into a pot of bubbling water, slowly expanding and thickening into a rich, velvety porridge. Sometimes, if we were lucky, A small piece of feta cheese would be crumbled into the steaming bowl, melting slightly and adding a creamy, salty richness to the earthy flavor. Sitting around the kitchen table, blowing on the hot spoon, we felt a deep sense of security. The trahanas warmed our freezing hands and filled our empty bellies, connecting us to the rhythm of the seasons. It was a dish that required almost no money, yet it possessed a profound emotional wealth. Every spoonful was a reminder that we were cared for, that the careful preparations of the summer would see us safely through the winter. Let us travel back to the rhythmic routine of the midweek family dinner, a time when meat was reserved strictly for Sundays or special holidays. The undisputed king of the Greek table on a Tuesday or Thursday was, without a doubt, a deep, steaming pot of fasolada. This humble white bean soup is woven into the very fabric of our history. The preparation began the night before, a quiet ritual where the dry beans were soaked in a large bowl of water, plumping up in the darkness of the sleeping kitchen. By the next morning, the house would slowly fill with the sweet, fragrant smell of celery, carrots, and onions sweating in golden olive oil. The magic of fasolada lay not in expensive ingredients, but in the slow, patient simmering that allowed the humble vegetables to meld into a rich, hearty broth. We would sit around the cramped wooden table, the steam fogging up our glasses, armed with a thick heel of crusty bread, ready to soak up every last drop of the bright red tomato-tinted juices. Accompanied by a few salty olives or a pungent raw onion, this meal was a masterclass in survival and satisfaction. It taught us that a full, happy belly did not require a wealthy purse, but rather the patience to let simple things cook slowly. Sharing that large pot of bean soup reinforced our bonds and taught us the value of communal eating. As the memories shift toward the scorching heat of the Mediterranean summer, let us recall a combination that makes perfect sense to anyone who grew up under the blazing Greek sun. It is the simple, refreshing pairing of cold, sweet watermelon and sharp, salty feta cheese. Imagine a lazy August afternoon, the air heavy and still. The only sound, the relentless buzzing of the cicadas in the olive trees. Lunch was light because the heat stole our appetites, but the need for refreshment was constant. A massive striped watermelon, chilled in a bucket of cold well water, would be brought out and sliced open, revealing its crisp, ruby red heart. Alongside it, a stark white block of feta cheese, swimming in its salty brine. The ritual was effortless, but profoundly satisfying. You would take a bite of the intensely sweet dripping fruit and follow it immediately with a small nibble of the crumbly sharp cheese. The contrast was electric. The saltiness heightened the sweetness of the fruit, while the watery crispness washed away the rich dairy flavor, leaving you reaching for another bite. We ate this on shaded verandas, juice dripping down our chins, laughing with cousins and siblings. It cost mere pennies, provided by the local farmer, yet it was the definitive taste of our childhood summers, a brilliant culinary paradox. Let us move to another summer staple, a true testament to the philosophy that nothing should ever be wasted in a Greek kitchen. When the tomato vines were heavy with overripe fruit, soft and bursting with sweet acidic juices, they were never thrown away. Instead, they became the foundation for a quick, magnificent meal. Sometimes, it was as simple as rubbing half a juicy tomato over a hard slice of dry bread, letting the red pulp soak into the crumb, topped with a pinch of coarse sea salt and a heavy pour of olive oil. But the true magic happened when those overripe tomatoes were grated and turned into tomato keftades, the beloved tomato fritters. A little flour, some finely chopped onion, perhaps a handful of fresh mint plucked from a rusty tin can pot on the balcony, and you had a fragrant batter. We would stand by the stove, watching the hot oil bubble as small spoonfuls of the red batter were dropped in, sizzling loudly. The smell of frying herbs and sweet tomatoes would drift out into the neighborhood, calling us to the kitchen. We ate them hot, straight from the pan, burning our fingertips because we simply could not wait. Crispy on the outside, soft and incredibly flavorful on the inside. These fritters were a cheap, meatless feast. They taught us a beautiful lesson about resourcefulness and transforming imperfect vegetables into joy. As we wander deeper into our memories, let us recall the sensory shift that marked the arrival of autumn in the city streets. The evenings grew crisp, and the familiar, comforting scent of wood smoke and roasting nuts would begin to drift through the alleyways. We did not have much pocket money, perhaps just a few drachmas jingling in our wool coats, but that was all we needed to visit the neighborhood chestnut vendor. He stood on the corner like a seasonal sentinel, tending to his charcoal brazier with a blackened wire mesh pan resting on top. The ritual of buying roasted chestnuts was a small but significant joy. We would watch in quiet fascination as he expertly scored the brown shells with a sharp knife, then tossed them over the glowing coals until they popped and charred, releasing a sweet, earthy fragrance. For a few coins, he would hand us a cone fashioned from an old piece of newspaper, filled with the hot, soot-covered treasures. We would walk home slowly, using the warm paper cone to heat our freezing hands. Peeling the scorched shells was a delicate operation, leaving our fingers blackened and smelling of smoke, but the reward was a soft, incredibly sweet, golden center. This humble street food was more than just a snack. It was an accessible luxury, bringing a moment of warmth to the dark walk home. Let us now think of the busy mornings, the chaotic symphony of car horns, and the hurried footsteps of people making their way to work or school. Woven into this morning tapestry was the iconic call of the coulouri vendor. The simple, sesame-encrusted bread ring was the ultimate fast food of our era, long before such a term even existed. Baskets piled high with these golden rings were balanced on the heads of vendors or perched on small folding tables on busy street corners. The smell of toasted sesame seeds was absolutely intoxicating, an aroma that instantly triggered our morning hunger. We would hand over a tiny coin and receive a ring that was ideally still slightly warm, crispy on the outside and chewy on the inside. Eating a coulouri was an exercise in pure, unadulterated pleasure. The sesame seeds would inevitably spill onto our clothes, leaving a trail of our breakfast behind us. It was the food of the everyday worker, the hurried student, the mother running errands. We ate it while walking, while waiting for the bus, or while chatting with a neighbor. It required no plate, no utensils, and barely any money, yet it was deeply satisfying. This simple ring of dough and seeds was a great equalizer, a shared culinary experience that connected everyone on the street, proving that comforting tastes come in humble packages. Another memory that surfaces with pristine clarity is the arrival of the milkman, a figure of vital importance in our neighborhoods. But it was not just the milk we looked forward to, it was the traditional yogurt, served in small, porous clay pots, with a thick, yellow skin of cream on top. This was not the processed, overly sweetened product you find in plastic cups today. This was real, tart, fresh yogurt, rich and heavy. Because refined sugar and store-bought desserts were often beyond our meager budgets, we turned to nature's sweetener. We would take a spoonful of thick, dark honey, often brought from a relative's village in the mountains, and let it cascade over the snowy white yogurt. The ritual of eating it was precise. You had to break through that firm, buttery skin at the top to reach the cool, creamy depths below, ensuring each spoonful had the perfect ratio of tart yogurt and floral, sticky honey. Sometimes, a few crushed walnuts would be sprinkled on top, elevating this humble snack to a magnificent dessert. It was a dish deeply rooted in the pastoral traditions of our land, bringing a taste of the rugged countryside directly into our modest urban kitchens. Scraping the bottom of that rough clay pot with a metal spoon meant you had consumed a meal that was pure, wholesome, and profoundly satisfying. Let us remember the sacred tradition of hospitality that defined our homes, regardless of how little money was in the bank. When a guest unexpectedly knocked on the door, panic did not ensue over a lack of expensive treats. Instead, The small, sparkling glass jars of spoon sweets, the glycoto were proudly brought out from the dark cupboards. These sweets were a masterclass in preservation and frugality. When a fruit tree in the courtyard yielded too much, nothing was left to rot. Bitter oranges, sour cherries, unripe figs, and even thick watermelon rinds were painstakingly boiled in heavy sugar syrup until they became translucent jewels. The ritual of serving them was a beautiful, choreographed dance. A tiny glass plate, a small silver spoon holding exactly one piece of the syrupy fruit, and a tall glass of ice-cold water. We would sit in the formal parlor, the room reserved strictly for company, and slowly savor that intense, sugary bite, washing it down with the crisp water. It was a gesture of immense respect and generosity. Through these sweets, our mothers communicated that our home, though perhaps poor in material wealth, was endlessly rich in warmth and welcome. The spoon sweet was a slow, deliberate indulgence that forced us to pause, look our guests in the eye, and truly connect. As we journey further into the heart of our mothers' kitchens, we must speak of a dish that was the absolute cornerstone of our weekly survival: the humble lentil soup, known to us all as fakes. In a time when grocery budgets were stretched paper-thin, lentils were the miraculous savior. They were incredibly cheap, could be stored forever, and swelled into a hearty, nutritious meal that fed an entire family for pennies. The cooking process was straightforward, but filled the house with a deeply earthy, comforting aroma. A few bay leaves, a clove of garlic, and a splash of olive oil transformed the tiny brown discs into a thick, velvety stew. But the true secret, the ritual that every Greek child remembers, was the final touch added at the table. A generous splash of sharp, pungent red wine vinegar was poured directly into the bowl. This hit of acidity cut through the earthy richness, brightening the entire dish and creating a flavor profile that is permanently etched in our minds. Paired with a few salty olives and whatever stale bread was left over from the day before, a bowl of fakes was a complete, deeply satisfying meal. We grumbled as children when we saw it, wishing for something extravagant. Yet today, the smell of boiling lentils evokes a profound wave of nostalgia for a mother's quiet triumph. Let us think about the art of making something out of seemingly nothing, a skill our parents possessed in abundance. When bread went stale, and I mean truly rock hard, it was never, ever thrown away. Throwing away bread was considered almost a sin in our households. Instead, it was naturally dried into paximadia, hard rusks that could last for months. On days when the pantry was bare and there was no money for fresh groceries, these hard as stone pieces of bread were resurrected. The ritual was deeply tactile. We would take the dry rusk and run it quickly under the cold kitchen tap, just enough to moisten the exterior without turning it into mush. Then, we would place it on a plate and patiently wait a few minutes for the water to soften the dense crumb. What followed was a magical transformation. A heavy pour of green olive oil was massaged into the damp bread, followed by a shower of dried oregano crushed vigorously between the palms of our hands to release its wild fragrance. Perhaps a pinch of salt, and if we were lucky, a crushed clove of garlic rubbed on the surface. This humble preparation turned a piece of discarded bread into a deeply flavorful, aromatic meal. It taught us reverence for our food, showing us that patience and wild herbs could transform an unyielding crust into a feast. Now, let us bring our minds to those lazy Sunday mornings, or perhaps a rainy afternoon when we were trapped indoors, restless and craving something sweet. The ultimate comfort food, requiring only the most basic ingredients of flour, water, yeast, and salt, was the beloved fried dough, the Tigonites. Long before fancy imported pastries became the norm, our mothers and grandmothers conjured magic with a frying pan and a simple batter. We would hear the loud hiss of oil hitting the hot pan, and immediately we knew what was coming. We would rush to the kitchen, watching in awe as spoonfuls of sticky dough were dropped into the shallow, bubbling oil. The dough would puff up instantly, turning a glorious, crispy golden brown, with irregular rustic edges. The smell of frying dough is perhaps one of the most universally comforting scents in existence. They were scooped out, still dripping with hot oil, and piled high on a plate lined with old newspaper to absorb the grease. The finishing touch was simple, but perfect. A generous drizzle of dark honey, or a heavy dusting of granulated sugar and warm cinnamon. We ate them piping hot, burning our fingers, pulling the stretchy, chewy dough apart with our teeth. They were a cheap, spontaneous celebration, proving that joy only required the loving hands of a mother. Let us travel to the realm of childhood triumphs, to the dish that brought universal cheers to the dinner table. Pasta was cheap and filling, making it a staple of our frugal diets. While a rich meat sauce was a rare celebratory treat for a holiday, our everyday reality was something much simpler, yet arguably just as beloved. I am talking about plain pasta, usually thick, long macaroni with a hole in the middle, tossed in burnt butter or hot olive oil. The ritual was mesmerizing. The pasta was boiled until tender, drained, and returned to the pot. Then, in a small pan, butter or a cheap margarine was heated until it foamed, browned, and released a nutty, almost caramel-like aroma. This scalding hot fat was poured directly over the waiting pasta, creating a loud, satisfying sizzle that made our mouths water instantly. The crowning glory was a mountain of grated mizithra, a hard, salty, pungent sheep's milk cheese that was much cheaper than imported parmesan. The heat of the pasta would slightly melt the cheese, creating a sticky, salty, incredibly comforting coating on every strand. We ate it eagerly, winding the thick noodles around our forks, entirely content. This dish was the ultimate culinary safety blanket, deeply savory and providing immense psychological comfort during times of scarcity. Let us remember the evenings spent at the summer cinema, or simply sitting on the front stoop with neighbors, sharing stories under the starry sky. In these moments of communal leisure, snacking was essential, but it had to be extremely cheap. The absolute rulers of this domain were roasted chickpeas and salted pumpkin seeds. We would buy them from small kiosks or roaming street vendors, packaged in small cone-shaped paper bags. The roasted chickpeas were hard, dry, and slightly salty, requiring a good set of teeth and plenty of chewing. They had a dusty roasted flavor that paired perfectly with a cold glass of water or a shared soda. The pumpkin seeds, on the other hand, required a specific, learned technique. You had to crack the salty white shell between your front teeth, extracting the tiny green seed inside while discarding the husk. It was a slow, meticulous process that kept our hands and mouths busy for hours. Eating these seeds was never an isolated activity. It was the soundtrack to our socializing. The rhythmic cracking of shells and the crunching of roasted chickpeas provided a steady acoustic backdrop to neighborhood gossip, political debates, and the laughter of children playing in the dark. These humble seeds were the social glue of our evenings, extending the time we spent together. As we think of special treats, we cannot forget the flaky, golden perfection of a warm bougatsa on a Sunday morning. For families operating on a tight budget, going out to a restaurant was completely out of the question. However, the occasional Sunday purchase of a single large portion of bougatsa to be shared among the entire family was a permissible luxury. The ritual of going to the local bakery was an event in itself. You would stand in line, smelling the intoxicating aroma of melted butter, baked phyllo dough, and sweet semolina custard. The master baker would take a massive rectangular pie from the oven and, with a heavy cleaver, chop it into small, bite-sized squares with rapid, rhythmic thwacks. Placed in a simple white box, it was heavily dusted with a snowstorm of powdered sugar and a thick layer of spicy, aromatic cinnamon. We would carry the warm box home like a precious treasure. At the kitchen table, the box was opened, and multiple forks would dive in simultaneously. We fought over the crispy corner pieces, laughing and licking the powdered sugar from our lips. That shared box of bougatsa was a symbol of the weekend, a brief, sweet respite from the frugal reality of the work week. It taught us that joy is amplified when shared, and that a single portion can feel like an absolute feast. Let us cast our minds back to the deep winter, a time when the heart of the home was the heavy cast-iron wood stove, radiating heat in the center of the living room. It was not just a source of warmth, it was a secondary oven, a gathering place, and the site of one of our most beloved frugal desserts. When apples began to turn soft and wrinkled in the fruit bowl, losing their crispness, they found a second life on top of the hot stove. Our mothers would core the apples, perhaps stuffing the center with a spoonful of sugar, a dash of cinnamon, and if we were extremely fortunate, a few cheap raisins. These prepared apples were placed in a shallow tin pan and set directly onto the hot metal surface. As the hours passed, the heat would slowly bake the fruit, causing the skins to burst and wrinkle further, releasing a sweet, caramelized syrup that bubbled around the edges. The entire house would fill with the intoxicating, warm smell of baked fruit and spice, masking the faint odor of wood smoke. Eating that hot, mushy, intensely sweet apple while huddled around the stove was a moment of pure magic. The stove provided the heat, the soft apple provided the comfort, and the closeness of our family, sitting in a circle, provided the love. It was a masterpiece of domestic economy and immense emotional warmth. Now let us recall a dish that is deeply intertwined with our memories of feeling slightly unwell, but also of profound comfort. When a stomachache struck, or when funds were so low that even a trip to the local grocer was impossible, the answer was always the same: simple boiled rice with lemon. It sounds entirely unappealing to the modern palate, yet to us it was a bowl of pure, healing magic. White rice was boiled in plenty of water until it was just past the point of being tender, releasing its starches to create a slightly thick, cloudy broth. The transformative step was the addition of fresh lemon juice and a good pinch of salt. The sharp, bright acidity of the lemon completely changed the character of the bland rice, turning it into a soothing, zesty, and highly palatable meal. We would sit on the sofa, wrapped in a heavy woolen blanket, slowly eating the warm rice spoon by spoon. It was easily digested, incredibly cheap, and surprisingly satisfying. But the true value of this dish was not in its nutritional profile. It was in the hands that served it. It was the food of maternal care, a tangible expression of a mother's worry and love, delivered in a humble white bowl. Even today, a simple bowl of lemony rice can transport us back to that state of being unconditionally loved. Let us bring to mind a sweet treat that was as much a toy and a physics experiment as it was a dessert, the legendary submarine sweet. During the long, sweltering afternoons of the Greek summer, when chocolate would simply melt into a puddle, this ingenious invention was our ultimate sugary escape. It consisted of a thick, pliable mastic, or vanilla fondant, kept in a large, heavy glass jar in the kitchen cupboard. When we begged for a sweet, our grandmother would take a teaspoon and twirl it deep into the sticky white paste, gathering a large bulbous dollop on the end of the spoon. This was then plunged into a tall glass of ice-cold water. The ritual of eating it was an exercise in patience. You would pull the spoon out, take a small cold chewy bite of the sweet vanilla paste, and then plunge it back into the water to keep it firm. As you ate, the fondant slowly flavored the water, so that when the sweet was finally gone, you were left with a glass of deliciously chilled, vanilla-scented water to drink. It was a brilliant, incredibly cheap way to satisfy a sweet tooth and cool down at the same time. The submarine sweet was a symbol of hospitality, highly interactive, and stretched a single spoonful of sugar into a beautiful experience that lasted for half an hour. As we approach the end of our culinary journey, we must pay homage to a dish that transcends generations, but holds a very specific, deeply nostalgic place in our memories. I am talking about real, homemade fried potatoes. Today, French fries are cheap fast food, uniform and flavorless, but in the 1970s, frying potatoes at home was an event, a magnificent, greasy celebration. Potatoes were cheap and always available. Our mothers would hand-peel them, meticulously cutting them into thick, uneven wedges, never thin strings. The magic, however, lay in the frying medium. There was no cheap vegetable oil in our kitchens. We fried in pure, heavy green olive oil. A large, battered frying pan would be filled with oil, and the potatoes were dropped in, sizzling violently. The house would smell intensely of earthy potatoes and rich, heated olive oil. They were scooped out, golden brown, with crispy edges and soft, fluffy interiors, then heavily showered with coarse salt and dried oregano. We would attack the plate before they even cooled, tossing the hot potatoes from hand to hand, burning our mouths but unable to stop. This was our true luxury, a massive plate of potatoes fried in olive oil, shared with siblings, fighting over the smallest, crispiest bits at the very bottom of the pile. Finally, let us close our eyes and remember the absolute purest form of eating we knew, a food that required absolutely zero money, no preparation, and no cooking whatsoever. I am speaking of the sheer, unadulterated joy of eating fresh figs plucked directly from the tree. In our neighborhoods, or during trips to the village, fig trees grew wild and abundant, their large lobed leaves providing deep shade in the relentless summer sun. We knew exactly which tree had the sweetest fruit and exactly when they were ripe. We would climb the rough bark, reaching for the plumpest, softest figs that were already beginning to split open at the bottom, a single drop of sticky nectar forming at the tear. The ritual was primal and perfect. You peeled back the fuzzy skin to reveal the soft pink seed-filled interior, eating it right there, perched on a high branch. The fruit was warm from the sun, incredibly sweet, tasting of honey, earth, and pure sunshine. Our hands and faces would become sticky with the white sap, but we did not care at all. This was nature's candy, freely given, asking absolutely nothing in return. Plucking and eating those warm figs reminded us that even when our pockets were completely empty, the earth around us was profoundly generous, offering moments of absolute happiness. As we open our eyes and return to the present day, we must realize a profound truth. When we crave these simple, cheap foods, we are not just hungry for the taste of olive oil, oregano, or roasted chestnuts. What we truly miss is the irreplaceable feeling of our youth, the unhurried pace of the days, and the deep, unbreakable connection we shared with the people who prepared these meals with such loving hands. We miss the mothers and grandmothers who performed daily miracles with empty cupboards. If this journey back in time brought a smile to your face and warmth to your heart, please subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. It truly helps us keep these precious memories alive. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these 20 foods brings back the absolute strongest memory for you? Or is there another humble, inexpensive dish your mother made that you still dream about today? Please write your personal story in the comments below. Thank you for sitting at this table with me, and until next time, may your memories always be as sweet as a warm fig in the summer sun.